A huge number of the questions dealt with, maybe not surprisingly, snow removal. Whether it was your first question or second question, will anybody in a group that had a snow removal question stand up, please? Told ya. Okay. And these are like in no particular rank order and the like. And again, if somebody who's with the Public Policy Center is keeping track of which group. Great, good, thank you very much. Yeah, if you could, as we go around, say your name and your group number. Hi, Dory.
Hi, I'm Dory Rodriguez, Group 4. Yes. It says that public safety would not be compromised unless the snow level is 8 inches or higher. We would like to know, how was that determined? And is it safer not to plow in some circumstances?
That's a great question, and I'm not sure that there's a specific depth of snow that identifies the level of safety. The purpose of the question that we had was directed more at do we clear just the arterials and emergency routes?
Hold the mic just
a little
bit closer.
Can you hear me better there? Okay. Do we clear just the arterials and emergency routes, which is what our phase 1 operation is, and at what point do we go into residential areas, which we would consider more of a non-essential, certainly a public convenience, but not a public safety issue as much, because the reason for plowing the arterials and the emergency routes is so that emergency vehicles can get through if there's a fire, if there's a need for an ambulance or police activity. And so that's really the public safety aspect of it. Not so much whether or not you have ice on the street in front of your house, although that certainly is a different type of safety activity. The question she said was it would be difficult to answer the question without, I'm sorry, say it again. She's correlating the data available to establish whether it's a safety issue to plow residential areas or not. And again, plowing the residential areas currently we do after a snowfall of 4 inches or more, and it's not as much related to public safety as it is related to convenience for the community and what level of service they want to have.
Good. Joan with Group 6.
Okay. This is sort of based on some concerns about the way questions were framed, and we used the snow removal as the example, but why not switch to an administration that relies on common sense judgment rather than formulas such as 4 inches of snow?
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
The question was why not switch to a system that relies on common sense judgment rather than formulas such as a firm 4-inch designation? Great.
Again, a great question, and certainly I think the first part of that we'd have to address is whose common sense are we going to rely on, because one person's common sense is another. If it were up to me, someone was pointing to me, certainly if we have a policy to go into residential areas with 4 inches of snow or more, if we barely get 4 inches and we're in the spring and the next day we're going to get thermal melt from the sun, we may say let's not go into residential, and it might be a budget issue. But if we get 3.5 inches and our policy is 4 inches and it's the middle of winter and our temperatures are going to be sub-freezing for a long time, that might be a different decision. And certainly we get 4 inches at the airport, that's different than getting 4 inches downtown. We do look at all those things to make our decisions on when we're going to go in and whether or not to pre-apply material and those types of things. There is a lot of common sense that goes into every decision we make, but we do also have to have policies, because then it comes a matter of do we go in at 4 inches, do we go in at 6 inches, do we go in at 3 inches? We do have to have a policy to have a starting point to judge our a starting point on which to make our judgment. If we don't have any policy at all and every snow we make a different decision, then that's not predictable either. And so I think you understand that we do have to have a framework to base our decisions, and otherwise it'll be different every single time.
And all the way back here at table 15, Todd?
We were wondering, can we outsource residential snow removal? And would this be a significant cost reduction?
Another good question. We do outsource a portion of our residential snow removal. currently. We have contracts in place with folks that own equipment. There's a lot of farmers in the area. In fact, we have folks come as far away as Nebraska City, bring equipment before snow season and leave it positioned at different places around the city. And when we do go into our residential phase of our snow removal, they come in and assist us with that operation. Part of the problem we have is that there's not enough local contractor equipment and availability to do that work because they all have their own individual contracts for private snow removal.
Right. Table 14, Gene.
I wanted to thank you all for coming once again. We wanted to know, we have a two-part question. We cheated. And basically, we wanted to know what the current level of service for arterial cleaning was, 8 hours, 24 hours, etc. And what would the cost per vehicle be to maintain the current level of service for arterial and residential snow removal?
I don't know if I can give you some exact numbers, but I can give you a general response. First of all, the first question was how long does it take to clear arterials? We do have several phases of snow removal that we go through. The first is material spreading, where we spread a mixture of salt and sand on the streets. And then we go into, when the snow gets to a certain level, we drop the plows and start plowing. It takes about 8 hours to get through the whole city on the arterials. We have not increased effectively the number of pieces of equipment that we have for about the last 20 years. And so, but the city has continued to grow. So what used to take about 5 hours now takes about 8 hours or a little bit more to get through the same, cover a bigger distance with the same amount of equipment. And the second part of your question was again? Oh, cost per vehicle to, cost per vehicle or cost per the wheel tax? Yes. I'm not sure exactly how to answer that, but maybe I'd indirectly answer it this way. All of our snow removal is paid through the wheel tax. So we essentially have a fixed revenue stream for snow removal, which amounts to roughly $3 million a year. And then whatever's left over stays in that fund as a cushion for the next season if we have a particularly rough winter. So we don't really have a control over how much we get. That's pretty well set by the number of vehicles and the amount of taxes that are paid through the wheel tax. So that budget stays pretty level. Does that get to where you're going with the question, or? Oh, okay. And actually, snow removal is a little different than the rest of the discussion we're having because it's not a general fund item. And I guess I would answer it this way. The portion of the fund that's left over each year, we typically keep, it usually ends up being about $1 million to $1.5 million each year. That's the cushion we keep. If we chose, we could use that money on other roads-related type projects, fill more potholes, do more maintenance, that type of thing. So if we chose to not do the residential snow removal or do less of it, then in theory we would have more left over each year to then shift into those other activities. And that's the real basis for the question. We're not actually asking for more money to do more snow removal, and we're just want to know if you'd like us to do less, essentially.
Good. I'm going to have you wait. I'm going to do libraries in a second, and so you stay put. Well, I know, but I'm going to have you do your library question next. We're going to shift topics, and I want to make sure we get your first question first. Bob, if you could join us for a second. Bob with Group 7 here.
Yeah, Group 7. Is there a less expensive alternative for snow removal on residential areas, neighborhood streets, for instance, applying sand to the streets?
I'm not sure that that particular method would be less expensive. Certainly, it would cost more to apply more material. Sand does not melt snow. We do currently apply sand in residential areas when we have slick areas. Folks like yourself may call in and say this intersection is very slick. It's dangerous. We immediately dispatch a sand truck out to spread area in that one localized area. We address that as much as we can. But it does create other problems. The more sand that we spread, the more we have to sweep off with our street sweeping activities the rest of the year, and that's another budget item, and that's part of our stormwater discharge pollution prevention permit that we have to maintain as well. So everything's interrelated, and it would actually be more expensive to do that. You've got to follow up.
Bob, go ahead.
Snow removal in residential
Let me have you
areas.
repeat the question, please.
Yeah, is there a less expensive alternative for snow removal for residential areas?
I think the least expensive way is to plow it and to use chemicals to remove it, and that's really what we're doing now. The least expensive way would be to not do it, of course, and avoid the cost. And that's really the question we're asking. Anything that we do, the biggest expense is the personnel required to do it. That's the single biggest expense above the equipment and the fuel costs and everything else.
Greg, take a breather.
Thank you.
Round of applause for Public Works.
And thank you.
If there are a few more questions about snow removal, we're going to return to the topic. We have to move on. An awful lot of questions about libraries as well. We're going to turn to our friends in Group 2. Is it Bastien? Bastien? You have the mic. And talk way into the mic.
We were numero uno on libraries, and we want data on the pages of library patrons and breaking it down. What's the percentage of computer usage by youth? What's your checkout data? And usage by branch and location? And have you considered flexibility of hours? And what results have you had in prior studies?
Okay, there are a lot of questions there, and I don't have a whole lot of data, but I can give you some general patterns. So in terms of, I think one of your basic questions was youth use compared to adult use. One of our general patterns is that at the city libraries, when we look at circulation, that is, what do people check out, we circulate about 3 million items a year, just over that. In a typical year, about 49% are youth and about 51% are adult. Then within each library, there are some pretty distinct patterns in terms of youth and adult use. The library that has the highest percentage of youth circulation is the Walt Branch Library at 14th on South 14th Street near Lincoln Memorial Park. The Isley Library up on Superior Street has a pretty similar pattern of use. The other libraries tend to have higher percentages of adult circulation compared to youth. The one with the highest percentage of adult circulation is Bennett Martin Library downtown, which probably represents that so many people stop in there on their noon hour at work. Then in terms of computer use and use by youth who are maybe using internet or other computers at the library, then I don't have those numbers with me, but I would just remind you that like through the school year, those computers are used through the day when kids are at school by adults who need to have internet access. So those numbers are a little bit harder to judge. I'm wondering if there are other parts of the question that I haven't addressed yet.
If you haven't, I think you're about to.
Okay.
Group number 1. Right here. Larry, how you doing?
Good, yourself? Good. Pat, regarding usage of libraries, how does the cost of operating, such as personnel costs, utility costs, etc., usage statistics such as the age, when they're used, and what are used, compared to as an average of per square foot of the library size?
Okay. I'll see what I can do on that for you, Larry. In terms of which libraries are busiest in terms of, say, most circulation per square foot, Bethany and South Branch libraries score very high in terms of circulation per square foot. I'd ask you to remember, though, that the other libraries contain large community rooms that increase their square footage for other use. So we have that. Then in terms of, say, staff costs, as well as maybe the costs that we have for books and other materials, in terms of efficiency, probably our larger branch libraries are more efficient in terms of some of those operating expenses. So that would be our overall trend there. In terms of overall use, though, Gear Library, for instance, at 56th and Normal provides about 1/3 of our use and circulation. So that's one place where we make pretty efficient use of our resources. Larry, did I miss one of your questions?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
It's kind of hard for you to see it in a comparison chart. People can make a more informed decision.
One of the points I would make, I think you also asked in terms
If
of...
you could, if people are off mic, if you could just give a quick summary of what they're saying.
Larry was pointing out there are a couple things that we didn't address, and I think one was sort of use per hour or through there, and then also trends in terms of when kids use libraries. As you would guess, with youth use, after school and evenings is big during the school year, and then in the summer we get a huge shift, where daytime is really when we see that kind of use. Then, I'm missing one. Well, we'll get to it later, I'm sure. Does that give you some general idea, though?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, where can we find statistics? Actually, we'll be posting some probably next week in terms of that, and we have quite a few in terms of use. Sometimes we're not able to pull out the numbers exactly the way a member of the public might hope, but we'll do our best to address those questions you've asked.
And we'll make sure that when you leave, you have the remind you the where the city's website is. Although if you Google City of Lincoln, Nebraska, it pops up pretty quickly also. Thomas from Group 9, also a library question.
Thank you. I was in Group 12, but then I got promoted to Group 9 in here, so got a fabulous group. Since our group feels that libraries are very important, especially in these hard times, what other options have been explored both within the libraries themselves and within the government to help cut costs while keeping all locations, especially in their neighborhood locations?
I know a lot of you have those questions. And I'll give you just sort of a brief 101 in terms of when library staff sort of sit down and look at this and do what I would call a collective gut check, frankly. So when we start looking at the amount of money that we'll have next year and we start thinking, how will we spend that money, how will we apportion that, we're often asking a basic question: do we cut back everywhere, or do we begin to pull out whole programs or buildings? And so I ask you to understand that for several years we've been pulling back pretty much everywhere in terms of the chart you saw showing, for instance, the number of city employees over the last few years. So it is the case that in the last few years we've been pulling back overall. So when we're asking ourselves, what else could we do? The main thing we could do, frankly, is cut back everywhere instead of close certain locations. And what that would probably look like would be closing at least probably 2 days at all locations that currently are open 7 days a week, and we would look at statistics probably to choose those days. For instance, in our current budget, what we're suggesting for Bennett Martin Library isn't closing the whole building, but closing 1 day a week. We've chosen Thursday because it's our least busy day. So that's how we made that particular selection. Then in terms of Bethany and South Branch libraries in particular, those we looked at in terms of their overall use. One of our questions always is, how can we impact the fewest number of our library customers? And so that's what we looked at in those terms. A question that I have to ask as director, especially if we're cutting back hours pretty far, is what does it mean in terms of use of library resources? For instance, think of Isley or Gear Branch Library that have maybe 20 computers available for people to use. What does it mean that we have those resources in a building that isn't open a whole lot during the week? Is that good use of resources? And we really have to ask that question honestly. On a personal note, I live very close to South Branch Library. I've worked at South Branch Library. I love South Branch Library. And when we started our deliberations, I sort of started with the point of view of, we will not close that library. So, you know, as we're looking at those questions, I think that each of us as library staff take that fairly personal too. And when we're asking how do we make the best use of those resources, that's a little bit of our train of thought, our line of thought, in terms of saying overall cuts or specific ones. I think I've probably taken more than 2 minutes for that answer.
Yeah, thank you very much. We're all the way back here at table 16 now. I want to add also that also on the web, but we will have a further explanation as to why Thomas was thrown out of his previous group and had to move. I think there's been a lot of discussion about just what led to all that. So we are going to change topics, and Police Chief Cassidy, if you could take to the microphone, and our friend Jeanette, Group 16.
Do police respond to non-injury accidents merely as a convenience for insurance holders, or does it serve as an effective tool for law enforcement and public safety, such as outstanding warrants and non-insurance?
I think it's primarily a convenience for people rather than an issue of safety. Here's the situation. When we respond to a non-injury traffic accident, we're spending quite a bit of time to conduct an investigation and produce an investigator's motor vehicle traffic accident report that makes it a lot easier for you and your insurance company to sort out those details. But I think that's primarily a convenience for you as a motorist that's involved in it and your insurance claims agent, rather than a matter of public safety. There is a small public safety component, but it's pretty darn small. You know, if we write someone a ticket for failure to yield the right of way at a traffic accident, that facilitates their later suspension if they're a chronic bad driver. So it does have that tiny little component of traffic safety involved in it, but it's mainly for convenience.
Somebody was too succinct. I didn't have time to prepare. Another group that had police on their list, who we haven't heard from yet. Both these groups. We'll get to you in a minute, Larry. Tracy, Group 1.
Oh, you've heard from our group. But.
Well, then sit down. My Lord, haven't we heard enough from you people already? Thank you for being honest. I appreciate it. We'll be. Larry from Group 5. Thank you.
Thank you. What do other cities do who do not send out an officer for the accidents? And also, is there a comparison on insurance rates between Lincoln and other cities that do not do this procedure?
Yeah. Succinct is something I've never been accused of before, Bill. The group can probably answer that as well as I can. Who's had an accident in another city where the police didn't come out and investigate? I have, twice. Washington, D.C. and Metropolitan St. Louis Police, where I had fender benders in both of those cities, and the police did not come and did not investigate. I also know that that's the case with the Maryland State Police. The Maryland State Police have push bumpers on their cars, so if you're involved in an accident and no one's injured, they're going to push you off to the side of the road and hand you the state form and send you on your way. Now, who's had a traffic crash here in Lincoln? Here in Lincoln that the police haven't investigated? Yeah, it was probably on a private parking lot. It was probably a Gateway or on Zermatt Drive down in South Point, because 15 years ago we stopped doing that. It's thousands of traffic collisions that we would have investigated otherwise. And my 1999 Volkswagen Passat in the Target lot at Edgewood is one of those. Parked at the very end of the lot so I want to get a door ding, and a mom and her 15-year-old daughter practicing driving in the abandoned part of the lot. That's a sinking feeling when you got a new car in the lot and you're being paged with the owner of a gray Volkswagen, please. And you know, we did just fine. I mean, we were able to settle the claim with the other driver's insurance company, no big problem. So thousands of people are going to have crashes in Lincoln this year without any police involvement at all, and most of them do just fine. And that's, you know, when I have to measure what it is that we do and what's most important, well, you know, the police department's about providing services to promote a safe and secure community. So I measure everything against that yardstick. How much does this contribute to safety and security? And frankly, doing that 300 field motor vehicle accident investigators form, it's the long version of the two-sided 17-inch one that you have to fill out. That doesn't contribute a whole lot to safety and security. And so, you know, I measured it fairly low. And I think what happens in other cities that have dropped this from their repertoire, and there are a few around the country, is that people contact their insurance companies and their insurance companies duke it out. That, in my estimation, will in the long run contribute to a slight increase in the cost of insurance. I don't think it'll be huge, but it almost creates a no-fault environment. And no-fault insurance states tend to be a little bit more expensive on auto insurance premiums. Our premiums in Lincoln are very low, by the way. We're one of the lowest claims-rated parts of the country.
And what happens if you do wait the 30 minutes? Is there a direct impact, or do you see a result of if there's that kind of delay?
A 30-minute delay, Bill? I'm sorry.
I'm channeling the question.
You're channeling something that I'm not picking up on.
The question that I wonder that I've heard in other communities is they'll send an officer to these non-injury automobile accident, but they'll send that officer after that officer may have completed something else, so that the people are waiting 30, 40 minutes. So it's still a service, but the citizens are waiting in the heat of the summer, the cold of the winter, or otherwise inconvenienced.
Oh, believe me, they're waiting 30 or 40 minutes commonly in Lincoln, because, you know, the peak time for traffic crashes is the peak time for everything else. So it's very common for us. Many times during the week, we have a couple of screens of incidents that we haven't dispatched yet because we don't have anyone available. We do that in priority order, and a non-injury traffic accident is not a high priority. So a 30, 40-minute wait to get an officer on a non-injury traffic accident that happens on a Friday afternoon at 4:30 p.m. would not be unusual at all.
Great. We're going to give you a breather, Chief. We have some stuff for mayoral staff and the like as well now. Ray with Group 3, you're on deck. Thank you, Chief.
Okay, I'm Ray. I'm just the messenger.
This isn't going uphill, is it?
Never mind, it's Rick. He's pretty short. We're interested in the quality of life in Lincoln, not necessarily the quantity. So we were kind of wondering, why are we given choices between things like kids' safety and libraries versus choices between things like bigger and better roads and subsidized development of areas?
You've asked an excellent philosophical. Can you hear me on this? Okay.
Yep.
First of all, thank you very much for the question, because it's not a hard question. And it comes down to a cold, hard fact of life about how these budgets work. The things that you mentioned in terms of roads and development are in a completely different fund than the general fund. The vast majority of our roads, another good example, Antelope Valley. How many of you wish we'd just stop Antelope Valley and spend the money on the things we've talked about? Okay? Well, guess what? If we stopped Antelope Valley, if Antelope Valley had never existed, we'd be exactly at the same point we are right now. None of that money is coming from the general fund. I should say very little of that money is coming from the general fund. So to answer your question, we are interested in the quality of life issues. I mean, we struggle with this. I honestly believe there's a great link between those quality of life issues and the crime rate we have, between youth delinquency. But again, most of the roads and development come from the non-tax funds that we talked about earlier, where you pay their fee for service or their federal or state funds. And the general funded stuff tends to go to the quality of life. So long story short, your property taxes and your sales taxes are the ones paying for the quality of life issues. I do have to ask my friend Steve Hubka if he has anything to add.
The only thing I would add is if you look at that bar graph that we showed you with the different departments and what portion of the tax funds they use, that's really the trade-offs that you can trade things between. And I'm sorry. That bar graph is the tax fund usage by departments for the tax funds. That's really what you have the option of trading, is between those particular bars on that chart. And as Rick mentioned in the presentation earlier this morning, it's public safety that eats up a good share of it. Then all those other departments use the rest of it. But you'll notice on there that roads are not one of the things that use tax dollars, and that's what Rick was getting at with the answer.
As much as I'd like to have every representative ask their own question, I don't have the card in front of me, so forgive me, I'm not going to be able to raise the hand of the group that's asking this. But one group asked, what is essential services? And I think that's actually something really important to identify as part of this as well.
Before I had this job, I thought I knew the answer to this question.
And which group was that, by the way? Over here? Good. Thank you.
As I said, it's such an eye of the beholder argument. Let me give you just an example that'll make a point that'll lead to a larger point. When we put the prioritization on the internet for the tier services. One of the things that's always been a pet peeve for me has been we give about $10,000 a year to the Lincoln Municipal Band Concerts, a series of conferences that go into Antelope Park each year. I honestly think that is not an essential service, and if it were up to me solely, I'd cut it tomorrow. It would be gone. But let me tell you, the number one thing that people commented on when we put our prioritization on the internet was to save the band service. And they made pretty passionate pleas. And let me tell you what they told you. Look, I don't consume very many tax dollars. I don't use any of your services. I've paid taxes for 50 years, and this is my one opportunity to go out and socialize with people. This is my one opportunity to be part of the community. Why would you take that away from me? And so it really is an eye of the beholder issue. Now, let me ask you, let me take the point of what essential services are, at least as far as the Beitler administration believes. Number one, obviously, is public safety. You have to make sure that the basic functions of the city continue to move forward, i.e., are we making sure that when someone has an emergency that we're getting there in a timely fashion? That is critically important, obviously. The second, if I may, is the the ability to put some infrastructure in place so that the city can continue to grow and generate the types of revenues that help us pay for the quality of life services that we find dear. I'd say another essential service to us is really the livability of our neighborhoods. What I think that really sets Lincoln apart is the fact that people feel safe in their communities, people feel like they have some neighborhood services, that literally where you live is a good place to live. Okay, and I think people across our community generally feel that. That is a priority and an essential service to us as well. Now, a number of you may completely disagree with that, but it really starts to get kind of gray as you go down the list as to what is in and out. I'm sure many of you don't use the trails, but I'm sure to some of you that has saved your life in terms of your health and your well-being. So that is an essential service to many people. So
and that's Mr. Hoppy's short answer to the question.
Ouch.
Sorry about that.
That's all right, Bill.
But we needed to get to our friends at table 13 who have my favorite question of the day so far. Del, how are you?
Fine, thank you. Our question is, how much property tax levy increase would be needed to maintain current services, and how can you raise taxes and get re-elected?
Now you've asked the right guy. Okay, we pegged this at 4 to 6 million, which is probably 2.5 to 4 cents on the levy, which on that $150,000 home is right around $40 to $60 a year. Okay, to save all those services at the high end. Boy, you ask a tough question on the re-election. I used to do a couple campaigns in a former life, and I'm here to tell you, that's the first, and I'm sure Jane could talk about this, that's the first thing they ask, and the last thing they ask, and everything they ask in the middle is what you're going to do about taxes. But I do think you can be reelected. I think you need to be honest. I think you need to be transparent. I think people need to understand the connection between what they're paying and what they're receiving. I think it's important that you put the facts out as best you can and do the best you can to convince people this is the right course of action. And I would tell you this too. Mayor Beitler told me when we first came in, look, I'm fixing this budget problem. If it means at the end of this they don't want me to be in office anymore, well then that's the sacrifice we made by getting elected. And I think everyone in this administration is committed to that approach, that you don't do this to maintain power. You don't get into office to be something. You get in office to do something.
Group number 10, Sean.
We have this question that has basically recreation centers versus school resource officers. Group 10 would like a lot more information on the fiscal impact, both negative, the costs, and positive of each program, and what are the measurable impacts for each program toward our desirable outcomes.
So this is dealing specifically with the resource officers?
Yeah, middle school resource officers, the City of Lincoln and the Lincoln Public Schools split the cost of providing 4 officers that cover 10 middle schools. And those officers, their vehicle, their benefits, the other indirect costs that go along with that amount to about $75,000 apiece. So it's just a shade under $300,000 to provide that. And the city's share of that is about $250,000, and the public schools the remainder. I'm sorry, about $200,000. The public schools the remainder. But whether it comes out of the left pocket or the right pocket, it's still your pocket. I have told several mayoral administrations as we go through this process every year that would be one of the first things that I'd cut if I had to. Not because I don't like middle school resource officers or think it's worthwhile. I just think it's a relatively inefficient use of a valuable city resource to have 4 officers shuttling between 10 schools. I might feel a little bit differently if those 4 officers were assigned 1 to each of the 4 highest need middle schools in Lincoln. But Lincoln Public Schools hasn't chosen to do that. So as a result, I'm spending too much time driving between schools. I just think it's not a real efficient use. We have a lot of things that go on at schools in Lincoln. Lincoln Public Schools is a city of 35,000. It's bigger than Kearney. And you would be shocked and amazed to see the things that we deal with, police matters that we deal with at elementary schools, middle schools, and especially high schools. In fact, I'm convinced that high schools, if we didn't have an officer at each high school, we'd simply have 4 or 5 officers there throughout the day. That's not quite the same in middle schools, which is why I think it's kind of a questionable use of that resource the way we're doing it. And we pose that question to you because we want you to think about that amount of money and an equal amount of money being spent for recreation programs at Parks and Rec.
Let me see if I can answer the other portion of that question. This year, we see about 780 kids a day at our before and after school programs. About 60% of the kids that we serve come from low-income families or come from economically disadvantaged families. We set the price of our we set the price of our structure that we price our programs based on 100% cost recovery, so that somebody who's paying full freight who is paying the full rate is paying the entire cost of that program. Like I said, about 60% of the kids are coming from families that they can't do that. We spend, or the city subsidizes the programs, which would essentially be a scholarship to the tune of about $100,000 a year. So the difference between the cost of operating our before and after school programs and what the city puts into it through tax funds is about $100,000. The other question that I'll see if I can answer a little bit, and the way that it was asked in the survey, is the other time beyond just non-after school time. What happens in the evenings? What happens on weekends? And for about $40,000 a day, or that would be a lot. For about $40,000 a year, we see about 150 kids a day, and we are working on very definitive surveys with those kids. We know that by those kids participating in those programs, they're making meaningful contacts with adults, that they're developing resiliency skills, they're building their self-esteem, they're building their fitness and some lifelong skills. We are doing some very detailed surveys this year with both kids and parents to measure the impacts of those dollars and the impact that they're having on those kids.
Great. Good. Gail from Group 11, question please.
Thank you for this report, and thank all of you for coming out and meeting with all of us. We're wondering, is too much being held in reserve as noted by the auditors in the newspaper? Thank you.
Let me start by just responding to one fact, and that is that our property tax calendar is such that we receive property taxes in August and April. And so keep that in mind as we go through this. And I think another important fact is we think we should have approximately 3 months worth of cash on hand, just as in other words, if there's a fund that has $1 million of expenditures, we should prudently have maybe $250,000 of cash just to deal with the the cycle of expenditures and receipts. And maybe a good example is the library fund. It had about $1.6 million at the end of August. Of course, we had received half of our property taxes, but by the following March, it was down to $160,000, or maybe even a little bit less. So you really have to manage to the low point, not necessarily the high point. So I think we feel comfortable that our balances are prudent, not excessive, and we just don't see many excess balances there.
We're all the way back here to Group 12. They thought they were going to be forgotten. They're the last in our first round of questions. Linda, please ask the question.
Thank you. How do we show taxes are the pathway to provide a greater vision for the city for the future?
Okay. My colleagues
Linda asked it, was this on? It's so quiet.
My colleagues are behind me every step of the way. Okay. Yeah, how do we show the taxes are the pathway to the future? Is that the short version of it? Okay. Again, I think it goes back to that issue of being really clear about what our money is paying for, about trying as hard as we can to tell people what their choices are, and honestly discussing those choices with you. I mean, that's why we really like having this time with you today. We were able to lay out the same things that you're seeing, we're seeing, and why we're making the choices we make. So one of the goals here today, obviously, is to have you go out in the community and talk a little bit about what you've seen and what you've heard, and tell people what you think. If you think we're all wet and we're wasting money, tell them that. If you think that really we're reaching a point where we need to do something different, tell them that. But I think the bottom line here is being very clear, very open, and very honest about what we're using our money for, what our strong points are, and what our weak points are. Look, we're not going to sit up here and tell you that we do everything perfectly. We don't. Let me save you the shock of that, okay? All we can do is try to get better at what we're weak at and try to be honest about the efforts that we're making. I hope that helped a little. It was kind of a broad philosophical question.
Group 12 also had, I'm going to give them their second question here also, which is an interesting one. Linda?
Thank you. It's why do we use external consultants so much?
Good question. I'm the Urban Development Department. Let me give you two examples of the use of external
a little closer on the microphone.
Thank you. External contracts that we've used. We've just taken over the responsibility for parking in this city and the management of the parking garages that we have. How many here would say it's not easy to find a parking place in downtown Lincoln? How many would say that generally? Yeah, by the way, our indications indicate right now, our studies show that in fact, at most given times, almost 20% of our parking spaces are unoccupied downtown. You wouldn't believe that because Lincoln has come to believe that there's no parking downtown and it's a pain to go there, and so our businesses think very seriously about going downtown because they think there's a big parking problem down there, and the public who raises their hand that says I can't find a parking spot down there won't go down as customers. And we want economic development downtown. We'd like to have businesses downtown. One of the reasons we have an external person to help us with that is we've never looked at parking as an economic development tool in our history before. So that when we see something that says, how about a first hour free in city garages, that could get a mental mindset of the public to say, wait a second, there would be parking downtown, I'll go down there, and that means that if I'm a business and I've got potential customers, I might go downtown to settle. We've never done that before. We don't know the math that it would take to set the big first hour to be free against what you'd have to collect in the other hours, and we went out and found a guy who helps us with that as we try to move to a retail strategy downtown so that we can make parking downtown not a loser. It continues to make money. It continues to let us build garages, but it could help us sustain more retail downtown. Nobody in the city of Lincoln has ever done that function before, and it's been done in maybe 3 dozen cities in the rest of the country. We went out and hired a guy who'd done it in 2 dozen of those 3 dozen cities because we needed help. And we're going to pay him about $100,000 to help us. But I will tell you this, that our budget for parking is about $5 million we've got in the black, and we've got about $22 million of bonding authority to build more parking garages. We've got money to build garages. We just need to know how to do it in a way that will build not just parking stalls, but economic development by the creation of new businesses. We've never thought in that way, and we needed help. Nobody had ever done it in this city. If it pays off, we will wind up getting new opportunities in downtown, and we're going to have to pay for that expertise because we don't have it. That's one. Let me give you a second one. Thank you. I'm sure I have a colleague here that I'll dispute with you in just a minute, but let me give my second story and then I'll finish. We did a second one, and the second one that we did was in the area of design standards and creating a master plan for the research and development corridor in Antelope Valley, namely the Opportunity District. We hadn't done that business before either. We brought in an outside expert. They helped us with it, trying to create a format that would encourage development. We paid them a healthy amount of money. They helped us with a number of documents. Among them were design standards that this city council passed, thank goodness. And when those design standards passed, a surety insurance company said, you know what? Knowing the kind of development that will be around us, we will come down to the Antelope Valley and build a $50 million project on the edge of the Union Plaza. We paid a handsome amount of money to somebody to tell us how to create the the circumstances that would encourage development. On the day that $50 million piece was done for a surety, there were 3 other projects either in or close to Antelope Valley for a total of $70 million of investment and growth in the Antelope Valley. We paid a handsome amount for an external consultant. We got a very handsome return on our investment. When we've hired folks to in our experience, in our department, it's for expertise that we cannot lay our hands on and that will bring hard dollar value to Lincoln. That's my experience so far.
Thank you very much.
Hey, Bill. Bill?
Yes.
Can the follow-up go?
Shout it out.
Yeah, Grace got it.
I'll give that a shot. By the way, Dave Landis, everybody.
Because one of the questions was, why haven't we heard enough from Dave Landis?
He should be speaking for all of us, quite frankly. He does a better job. I don't know if he answers the question, but he certainly does a more entertaining job. That's a great question, by the way. And I would just pile on a little bit to Dave's response, which I think will answer your question. In the case of Public Works, for example, we have engineers on staff, we have professionals, we have 570 employees all the way from bus drivers to professional engineers. We do not, however, have on staff the level of expertise required to study, recommend, and design improvements, for example, to our well-filled water treatment facility, transmission capabilities, and do all the projections necessary. That is ongoing study, and we regularly hire consultants to give us that technical expertise. If we were to decide to have that technical expertise in-house, and the people that operate the system every day, by the way, we have about a $1.5 billion water system that we operate every single day, so every day you can get up and brush your teeth and flush the toilet and do all those things that we all do. If we had that staff in-house, we would have to add 20 or 30 people, and by the way, we would have the staff to do that one project, but then when it came time for a wastewater project, they wouldn't do that. We don't have that technical expertise in-house. When we do those designs, we always competitively look at the process we're going to follow. We get second opinions through that process, and we regularly do peer review on the professional services that we hire as well.
Very good. We are very close to being on time. Just a couple more questions. This is the lightning round, okay? I'm going to go ahead and just run through these really quickly. From Group 11, what other revenue options are available? Income tax, increase, sales tax, etc.
There's some options for things like occupation tax we do at the local level, but if you remember the pie chart, those are relatively small portions of the revenue stream. Sales tax is we're at the maximum allowed by the state, so that's not an option, and income tax is not allowed under the state law at this point, and I got a feeling the governor would veto it if it ever passed the legislature. So our options are fairly limited as to ways to raise big dollars at this point.
There are 2 groups that had questions about almost the premise of the question related to injury prevention programs. How do we know or prove the correlation between injury prevention programs and reduced childhood deaths and injuries? They aren't even sure if the data supports the question.
We're at the health department. We make lots of data influence decisions. We make sure. Sorry, I had dry throat. We make sure that we do things because the data tells us this is the problem in our community. We have lots of sources we can gather our data from. For injury, for example, we get lots of data, hospital discharge data from the ERs. We do risk factor surveys for all of our youth and our adults. So we get this information, and this tells us that these are issues in our community that, as a community, we must really look into and actually respond to. When we do, if for example, we saw that there was lots of injuries, childhood injuries at 20-something Holdridge, at the crossing walk there, we put in countdown cross signs 2-3 years ago, and since then we've had absolutely no injuries right there. So what we do is that once we create a program or fund a program, then we monitor that program to really determine if that program has been effective. So not only do we use data to make these decisions, so we gather data from multiple sources, we monitor our progress to make sure that it's effective. If it's not effective, we're not going to continue to do it. If it is effective, we know it's having a positive impact in the community, and it will go on as long as the problem's actually there. When the problem's not there, we'll no longer do it. Answer your question?
Right. Last question, we would be remiss if before we left we didn't deal with the arena and the budget. Why not use, I'll just read their question, why can't, and thank you Group 5, why can't we use the current recession to Lincoln's advantage by moving ahead with the proposed arena and convention center by issuing low interest bonds and building at low construction costs?
Well, I certainly agree that interest rates probably have not been lower, not significantly lower, and obviously we've seen some significant decreases in the cost of steel and concrete. So we would like to be building now. Of course, the mayor has indicated that he would like to have the community weigh in on a vote, so we're going to have to wait until that happens. But we're hoping that these prices and interest rates are still favorable at the time that vote occurs.
I'd only add real quick, bonds got to get paid back. And if they're paid back with property taxes, you put the arena in direct competition with many of the services we're talking about today.
We are, amazingly, on schedule. We need your cooperation to head to take care of business and get into your groups on time. A couple of other very quick housekeeping things. A reminder again. Somebody mentioned that the website, for instance, was on the back of the schedule sheet, and so make sure you hold on to that. Number 2, if you didn't get the question you wanted to ask answered, email. The survey that you have, any number of other ways to get it answered. We really do want to make sure that your questions get answered. And one small thing that somebody reminded me of that we should have mentioned this morning, your moderators this morning, who from everything I'm hearing are doing a fantastic job. There have been a couple instances where, well, you know, what's your opinion? And the moderators, for this occasion, and I know a couple of them, and I know they have opinions, believe me. Their job is their job is not to have an opinion today. Their job is to make sure all you have the opportunity to express their opinions. And again, what a great job they're doing. We will reconvene back here. Thank you so much. That was a great session. You guys were perfect.